Welcome, everybody, to the First Nations Low Carbon Transportation Project Kickoff and Info Session. My name is Sarah Bain. I'm the Senior Economic Development Policy Analyst for the BC Assembly of First Nations, and I have the pleasure of working with some of my colleagues who you will meet throughout this session. I'd like to also introduce Kyle Alec, who's going to do our opening prayer and remarks, and I'd like to briefly acknowledge the land that I'm on here. I would say that I'm firmly within Musqueam lands at our office here in Vancouver. So Kyle Alec is from Silex Nation and Tk'emlúps, the Shuswap Nation, a member of the Penticton Indian Band in southern British Columbia. He also served a short time on council for PIB and a 3-year term as the Union of BC Indian Chiefs Youth Representative, where he focused on elder abuse advocacy. He's currently with the BCAFN, which we're very excited to have him as our youth representative, and we're so grateful that he's part of our team. He grew up in the Indigenous planning world and specializes in facilitating processes for decision-making and planning. And I'm going to send it over to Kyle to start us off in a good way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. White limlum kulunchuten, white limlum to me. I just want to open us up in a good way this morning to prepare us for the good work that we'll be doing today. Thank you to everyone for joining. I just want to take the time to bless all of you for being here today, to bless the land that you walk on, and to bless us all going into heading into the summer months, as they all are a scary time for a lot of us in community. And I just want to bless us all for that. And I wish you all the best after today as well. White Huskell Halton Chai Squeezed Mahikin, Kintelson Pinkton. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kyle Alec, born and raised in Penticton, BC. My mother is Elaine Alec, and my father was the late Davis George. My grandparents on my mother's side were the late Sophie Alec and Saul Kenzie Basil, the Bonaparte Indian Band, and my grandparents on my father's side are the late Raymond George and Susan Ortland. I'm currently sitting as the BC Assembly of First Nations Male Youth Rep, and I'm so glad to welcome you all here today and provide some opening remarks. So with that being said, First Nations have been practicing, developing, and evolving our modes of movement and transportation since time immemorial. We know that First Nations in BC and across Turtle Island had sophisticated land and water trade routes, allowing for the movement of people, goods, services, and ideas over hundreds of miles at a time, which is contrary to commonly held belief that indigenous people have lived in isolated communities limited to topography. I know where I'm from in Secwe territory, we often did trading routes moving out more towards the Merritt area at certain times of the year. Access to safe, adequate transportation and associated infrastructure has been impacted by colonialization and systems that do not provide the needs for rural communities and remote areas, which is huge in a lot of communities and almost all of our communities. It's almost impossible for isolated communities to have access to local towns, places to buy goods or even get out there safely. First Nations women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people are especially impacted by the lack of access to transportation, which contributes to the crisis that we've been having with MMIWG and 2S LGBTQIA people, which is most evident. I think most of us can agree on the Highway of Tears in northern BC. And with that, the National Inquiry into MMIWG 2S+ calls for justice, TRC, and UNDRIP all have calls to action around transportation and mobility. In addition to recommendations regarding transportation were made in 2006 for the Highway of Tears Symposium report and in 2019's Red Women Rising report, which have not been implemented yet either. Further to safety, our communities are facing insane climate emergency, which I think we all are heavily impacted as well. In most of our communities, me and Penticton in the Okanagan, we suffer from forest fires almost every year. 2 years ago, I had it literally kilometers away from my home and was on evacuation for almost 2 weeks straight. and many of my family and a lot of our families have been directly impacted by forest fire in over the last few years. On the climate mitigation side, transportation has a large role to play, as transportation continued to account for the largest share of BC's emissions. The climate emergency brings the urgent need to reduce GHG emissions locally and globally, address cumulative GHG emissions, and reach net zero, equipping First Nations with tools and financing to adopt clean transportation options and leverage associated economic opportunities is crucial. This could include using low carbon fuels, accessing electric vehicles, and developing active transportation systems. And for me, this is one of the hugest things and one of the most interesting sessions that I've seen in a long time, and something that's been needed for a very long time in our communities is to have access to reliable and clean transportation for our communities. And some communities are heavily impacted, very rural communities, isolated communities, drive-in, flying communities, boat communities. Are in dire need for good transportation to have access to being able to get groceries or anything like that at a more affordable cost. So those are just a little bit of my notes, and just a little bit from me. I really want to hold my hands up to everybody that's in this room today talking about this this situation, and I really just want to wish you all the best of luck, and I am very looking forward to see the outcome from today's session. So with that, I'll hand it along. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for giving us an excellent summary of the project and why this is such a vital piece of work for the BC Assembly. Really appreciate it. Before we move forward, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, you guys probably saw a quick pop-up that said that this session is being recorded. Standard practice for the BCAFN. We record all our sessions so that we can post them on the BCAFN events page, and we'll send it out to all the participants following the session. We encourage participants to put questions in the chat or use the raise hand function so that we can get to everybody in the order that we see them. So does the automatic queue for us. We do appreciate that, and ensure that the workshop is as interactive as possible. So please ask any questions if you have them. And I'd just like to acknowledge our team here at the BCAFN, because there's a lot of people in this room that are doing hard work. So first of all, we have our climate change team, Patricia and Christy, bringing the women and girls lens, as well as her senior policy analyst skills, Sarah Fraze, our colleague in water, Sophia, and our administration team, Joanna, Annette, and Dara in communications for their work. And last but not least, we have somebody who's joined us as a scholar, Charlotte from UBC, to help form some of this work. So just a brief overview of the agenda. First, we have a presentation for BC Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation on the Clean Transportation Action Plan. Sorry, I got those last two words backwards. And second, we'll have somebody from Tk'emlúps from Secwe to share with us a little bit about their transportation planning journey, including the barriers, opportunity, and their self-determined priorities. And finally, the BCAFN will present the First Nations Low Carbon Transportation Plan. And it'll have some information about the goals of the project, the outcomes and key deliverables, and how you can become one of the 5 funded pilot communities, as well as the next steps. After the presentations, there will be a Q&A session. If you want, or you, of course, are more than welcome to ask questions along the way, once again, in the chat or with the raise hand function. I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca from Emily. She is the manager for Clean Transportation Action Plan at the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation. She's worked on the clean transportation policy for the province of British Columbia for the past 6 years, and prior to that in air quality and climate change planning with the Fraser Valley Regional District. She has a master's from UBC, so I guess you guys are in great company today with so many UBC students and alums. I'm going to pass this over.
I'm just going to screen share the presentation, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the warm welcome and for the invitation to speak today. It's a great privilege to be here today. So I'll kick things off by noting that I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the Tk'emlúps First Nation in northern BC in Prince George. It's where I was born and raised, and I'm actually visiting my family right now. Most of the time I live and work on southern Vancouver Island on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen peoples. And just to very briefly build on some of the opening remarks, I also wanted to share with the group today that growing up in northern BC and through my work and recreational opportunities, I've been very fortunate to visit a lot of the province. It's a very large province, lots of rural and remote areas. For example, the Secwe and Tk'emlúps nations. I've taken trips on the Central Coast, and I come to this project and this work with an understanding that there are very different challenges and opportunities for clean transportation in urban versus rural, remote communities across the province. And so that's a lens we're trying to take in developing the Clean Transportation Action Plan. So I'm just going to provide an overview of CTAP, as we're calling it, what it is intended to be. If you can go to the next slide, Christy. Thank you. So CTAP was a commitment made in the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030. The Clean BC Roadmap to 2030 was published in October 2021, and it's BC's latest climate plan that outlines how the province intends to meet its legislated GHG reduction targets for 2030 and get on the path to meeting 2040 and 2050 legislated GHG reduction targets as well. So the purpose of CTAP, it was again a commitment in the roadmap. It's intended to outline the next actions to meet legislated targets within the transportation sector. So transportation has its own sectoral targets contributing to broader British Columbia targets as well. It's intended to acting as a unifying single point of reference for transportation emission reduction actions that links to other existing work and fills the gaps as well. The intent for CTAP is to provide a long-term view to get us as a province toward net zero by 2050 and beyond, with short-term actions to also meet our 2030 targets, which are coming up in 7 short years' time. The Clean BC Roadmap established 5 pillars of action areas to guide the development of the Clean Transportation Action Plan, with targets in each that I'll get to in a moment. So you can see on the graphic, the intent with CTAP is to really focus on an efficiency-first approach. So instead of looking to simply switch all modes of transportation to, say, zero-emission vehicles, that is an important part of it, but we're looking to first make our transportation system more efficient to begin with. So areas of focus include reducing distances that people and goods have to travel around the province and to the province. We want to increase mode shift to efficient modes. And what that means is shifting more passenger trips to walking, cycling, and transit where possible, and shifting, so that's from private automobiles, and shifting more goods movement, so more freight to be moved by rail, which is trains, and marine vessels from trucks. And that's because cars and trucks, which our North American transportation systems have long been built around, are actually the least energy efficient modes of land-based travel. So they, in the current context where a lot of our transportation energy comes from fossil fuels, they produce a large amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we take more sustainable modes, there will be fewer emissions. And even in the future, when most or all of our transportation vehicles and equipment are zero emission, it still requires less energy. So for example, less electricity will be required when we're using modes that are more efficient. The other pillars established by the roadmap are to improve vehicle efficiency, to adopt zero-emission vehicles across all vehicle and equipment types, and then to use clean fuels where liquid fuels are still required. Next slide, please. So some of this context was already provided in the opening remarks. And I just mentioned earlier that the province and the transportation sector specifically do have legislated greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. In the transportation sector, we're looking to reduce emissions by 27 to 32% below 2007 levels by 2030. And we have a lot of work to do to get there because emissions have actually risen, not gone down, about 12% since 2007. So we need to change the trajectory that we're going on. As was mentioned earlier, the transportation sector is the highest emitting sector in BC. It accounts for about 40% of all GHG emissions in the province. And the main contributors within transportation to emissions are on-road heavy-duty vehicles, as well as light-duty vehicles. So these are passenger vehicles. And there's a smaller contribution from railways, marine vessels, and aircraft, as well as off-road equipment. And so our Clean Transportation Action Plan is looking to substantially reduce emissions from all of those areas, but you can see that on-road vehicles account for about 2/3 of transportation emissions. And the other note that's on the chart there is that moving goods, so freight accounts for more emissions than passenger vehicles. So we have a lot of work to do in reducing emissions from goods movement. Next slide, please. I mentioned that in addition to the GHG targets, the Clean BC Roadmap outlined additional targets that CTAP is intending to include the policy mix to address meeting. And I'll walk through these targets in just a moment, but they're ultimately all supporting reducing GHG emissions and also maximizing co-benefits. So increasing transportation access to people all across the province, ultimately improving affordability for individuals to transport themselves, improving affordability for goods movement. That's kind of the thrust of all of these targets. So we have a target in the roadmap to reduce vehicle kilometers traveled by 25% by 2030 compared to 2020. So that supports the reducing distances traveled overall. We have a provincial mode share target to increase the share of passenger trips to be made by walking, cycling, or taking transit to 30% by 2030, 40% by 2040, and 50% by 2050. And this is in line with a lot of targets that local governments and organizations across the province already have. So we've set a province-wide target there. There were energy intensity targets set to reduce the energy intensity of goods movement by 10% by 2030, 30% by 2040, and 50% by 2050 relative to 2020. And that this is a way of kind of supporting and driving more goods to be moved by more efficient modes, for example, by rail and marine that I mentioned earlier, as well as by more efficient on-road vehicles. The roadmap introduced accelerated zero emission vehicle targets. So we have an existing Zero Emission Vehicles Act that requires a certain percentage of new light duty vehicle sales to be zero emission. And the roadmap accelerated those targets, indicating that 26% of new light duty vehicles need to be zero emission by 2026, 90% by 2030, and 100% by 2035. And it also established a commitment to develop requirements for medium and heavy duty commercial vehicles to be zero emission. And that work is underway right now. There's actually just an technical engagement period has just been occurring recently on proposed medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle requirements in BC. And finally, the roadmap established low carbon fuel targets to strengthen our existing low carbon fuel standard, to reduce the carbon intensity for gas and diesel by 30% by 2030. Next slide, please. Thanks. So to develop CTAP, as I indicated at the beginning, it was a commitment made in roadmap in October 2021, and the commitment was to release CTAP by the end of 2023. So we are actively working on developing it right now. To inform its development, we've been conducting quite a bit of engagement over the past year or so. In terms of Indigenous engagement, the Minister of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation hosted 3 virtual sessions last fall in September 2022 with Indigenous communities across the province, asking for their priorities, thoughts, feedback, ideas, challenges as it pertained to CTAP and what we should consider. There have been 2 Clean BC Indigenous engagement sessions over the past year, late fall of last year, and then we've conducted previous engagement as part of the Clean BC roadmap in 2020 and 2021. CTAP itself had a technical stakeholder engagement process in spring of 2023. We received over 100 responses to our technical engagement. And I did want to highlight that we are planning more Indigenous engagement over the summer as the plan is getting further developed in preparation for a late 2023 release. So we are intending to send out a notification letter to all nations in BC this summer, further apprising them that CTAP is being developed and inviting ongoing feedback. And something I wanted to emphasize now, and I'll mention again at the end, is that while we do have a commitment to release a document, release a plan by the end of this year, CTAP will very much be a living document and definitely the implementation of it as well, its projects and policies. The work definitely won't be stopping this fall. It's going to be continuing and evolving and growing for years to come. So we welcome comments, questions, feedback, ideas, solutions, challenges. We would love to hear from you at any point in time, whether it's in the near future or later on. I should also mention that we're working on the Clean Transportation Action Plan. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, very closely with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, given their responsibility or shared responsibility to clean transportation in the province. And they'll be conducting some Indigenous engagement as well, pertaining to multimodal transportation options as it supports CTAP. Next slide, please. So here's a very brief summary of what we've heard from our Indigenous engagement so far. And as I've mentioned, it's ongoing and comments and feedback continues to come in. But at a high level, we've heard a lot of the great importance of expanding clean transportation options, particularly active transportation and public transit across the province. It must be safe, it must be reliable, it must exist. And that there's a great need for that to be expanded province-wide, particularly in rural and remote communities, options to connect to other parts of the province, but within more urban areas as well. We've heard of the importance to communities of being able to reduce car use and having different options, different alternatives being available to them that are not dependent on fossil fuels. In terms of zero emission vehicles, we've heard support for marine transportation, particularly recognizing that a lot of communities in BC, we're a coastal province, a lot of communities are on the coast and are reliant on marine vessels for transportation and for their livelihoods. There's an interest in economic opportunities, such as converting fleet vehicles and electrifying marine and rail. And we've also heard a lot the need for charging infrastructure for electric vehicles in northern and rural parts of the province, and making sure not only that it's there, but that it safely and seamlessly connects to the rest of the province as well. Next slide, please. We've also heard about the need for community clean energy. I don't think this is probably not news to anyone. There's a lot of remote and northern communities that are working to decarbonize their energy systems first and needing support, for example, to get off of diesel-supported energy to clean energy. And a lot of communities have indicated that that is their priority and will be working to focus on clean transportation solutions after that, or potentially in tandem. And again, there's a need for clean transportation options that make sense and are accessible in rural and remote settings, which are very different, as I mentioned at the beginning, needs and solutions to urban areas. And finally, we've heard that there's a need for more transparency and information sharing on, for example, the emissions associated with clean transportation technology, such as battery life cycle and impacts of batteries and recycling and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. And so we are absolutely incorporating all of the feedback we've received from all of our engagement with Indigenous communities, with technical stakeholders and others. I'm not able to go into much detail on what potential policies will be included in CTAP because it's under development right now. We're seeking direction and guidance from our elected officials at this time. But I can say that we've heard loud and clear, and we know that there will be significant expansion in active transportation and transit opportunities, and that'll be supporting our mode share and VKT reduction targets. In terms of zero emission vehicles, a specific example I can give is that the province has committed to completing BC's electric highway by the summer of 2024. And what this entails is having public charging stations along all major highways and major roadways in the province. So this includes more rural highways such as 37 and Highway 97 to the Yukon border and Highway 20 to Bella Coola. So that is very much on our radar and is slated to be completed next year. And I'd also like to highlight that our ministry, Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, we're very fortunate and excited to be working with our BCAFN colleagues who have organized this wonderful session today on this program, the Low Carbon Transportation Project. So I'm excited to hear more from the BCAFN and from all participants today on your priorities. And from my perspective, the Low Carbon Transportation Project will be helping to support Indigenous communities in working toward our provincial Clean Transportation Action Plan goals, and will also give us a lot of insight and information on how to develop and implement policies and actions to meet those targets province-wide that meet the needs of all British Columbians. And I've noted at the bottom there, underpinning all of this work, is that we need to make sure CTAP is for everyone in BC, for individuals and for businesses, and that we consider and address the different challenges and opportunities faced by communities province-wide. So in terms of next steps, I've mentioned that engagement on CTAP development will be ongoing. Feedback, questions, ideas are welcome at any time. As I've said, the CTAP document itself is planned for a late 2023 public release, so keep your eyes open for that. I'm sure we'll work with the BCAFN to, once it's out in the public realm, to share that with all of you. And again, implementation will be continuous. There will be more engagement on specific policies and projects that end up coming out of CTAP. So this will be kind of an evolving process. But fundamentally, CTAP is charting kind of an exciting path to meeting our emission reduction and other goals. And again, you can go to the last slide, Christy. Very much looking forward to your feedback, comments, questions today, and at any point going forward. My email address is on the slide here, so please feel free to reach out at any time. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for taking time out of your day to be here and present on all the work the province is doing. We're going to move along. There will be a time for questions at the end, I believe. So we're going to be moving along to our next presenter. So thank you so much for being with us here. Our next presenter is Jean DeBorg. He works in the planning and engineering department with Tk'emlúps to Secwe, one of the very few nations who has their own transportation plan. We're really excited to hear the work you're doing independently. John, can somebody bring him up? I can't see if he's spotlighted. My apologies.
Oh, hi there. This is John. Can everyone hear me?
Hi, I can hear you, John. Are you?
Yeah, I have a slide presentation. I wasn't sure how it was going to be uploaded, but I can speak to that if someone's able to bring it on the screen.
Yeah, I'll share it right now, John.
Thanks, Christy. Just bear with us one moment while we get screen sharing set up. And if you do have questions and you don't want to forget them, do feel free to just drop them into the chat. And if we can answer them, we'll hand them off to the person who can.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I'll just let Christy move the slides. I can just prompt her. But yeah, thanks for the introduction. My name's John Terborg. I'm the Planning and Engineering Manager for the Tk'emlúps band. And our community's been working on, I guess, transportation related plans over the last 5+ years or so. And yeah, just kind of looking back at that time, it does look like we've been working on a lot of things. We definitely have been busy and kind of kept at it. So hopefully it's informational for others on this call. But just a little bit of background about the Tk'emlúps community. We're kind of located within the greater kind of urban extents of the city of Kamloops. So we're definitely a very kind of urban facing community, and we have a lot of the challenges that the city of Kamloops has, being about 100,000 plus kind of population of people. And so definitely have some of the struggles of some smaller communities, which we are. We have about 4,000 people on reserve, and most of those are not band membership. But we have a lot of the challenges of having a lot of highways and traffic and other kind of pressures that kind of larger urban populations have. So Christy, if you want to go on to the next slide. So this is just a little kind of an outline of what I'll be speaking about. So some of the planning that the band has been doing, as well as moving into kind of bike networks and active transportation, and some commentary on kind of low carbon initiatives that the band's working on. And like I said, a lot of these plans started in and around 2017-18, and now that the plans have been realized, we're actually starting to implement some of these projects. But you can move on to the next slide. So this is our little corner of the city of Kamloops. So Tk'emlúps Reserve number 1 is this whole kind of yellow square, and we're in the kind of northeast kind of quadrant of the within the city of Kamloops. So a lot of the major highways and roads coming and going from the reserve are actually within provincial right-of-ways. And so the band and our local district office of the Provincial Ministry of Transportation partnered on a road network study. And this is a map that was one of the deliverables that was a result of that study. And so it's based on some solid engineering and planning efforts. And I think there's about 20 different road related improvement projects that were identified, and about half of them are within kind of the provincial highway corridor. So grade separated interchanges and intersections, as well as other upgrades to some of the internal local community roads. And so those are creating road extensions where there currently wasn't a road. It could also be upgrading intersections. And the overriding focus was safety. I think that's what a road network plan is basically focused on, and then also efficient traffic movement. And so this is a plan that, like I said, it was partnered on 50-50 with the provincial government, and we also had input from the city of Kamloops and other kind of stakeholder agencies. And if you can move on to the next slide. So this was another kind of agreement that the band was working on, and this is actually for transit service on reserve. And so this began in 2018 as well. And So basically, an additional route was added to the City of Kamloops public transit system. And I guess it's the 18th route within that system. And again, this was a partnership agreement, like a municipal type service agreement that was signed with the City of Kamloops, but it was also party to that agreement was the provincial government again, because BC Transit is contributing 50% of the operating funding to this agreement. And it was an agreement that has been in place. This is the 5th year, and we're looking to renew the agreement going forward, starting for another 5-year term. And within that renewal, there's an opportunity to kind of renegotiate the agreement. I think it's considered a success. We had a couple of years of pandemic where ridership was down, but generally, I think we're seeing increasing uptake, and it's I think improving local community members, opportunities for transit options, and also probably benefiting local businesses as well as people start to plan their days and their lives around having reliable transit service. Maybe moving on to the next slide. So yeah, as a result of having a bus route within the community, Tk'emlúps has invested in some sheltered bus stops, and these are in kind of higher frequency rider locations. Some of the bus route is going to change over time as kind of ridership increases and as our road system upgrades. And so investing in this type of a transit stop isn't going to be at every stop, but it is the ones that we know are going to be there for the long term. Next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, you can see on this map on the screen on the right, that's a map of the City of Kamloops's current bus routes. And so the Tk'emlúps route is that light turquoise one in the upper right corner of the map. And because we're a part of the city's system, where we've also been consulted and worked with the city on kind of a long-term plan for transit. And so a report that the city produced a couple years ago with BC Transit identified long-term expansion opportunities within the city system, and Tk'emlúps was able to get some feedback into that engagement, just to let the city and the province know what the band's plans were for the long term. Maybe the next slide, please. So as I said, our current agreement expires at the end of this year, and we're going to be re-engaging with the City of Kamloops and the province on what the next version of transit service will look like. And so some of the services that Tk'emlúps is interested in is expanding it from just kind of an I think it's currently an 8 or a 10-hour bus service, and so we want to expand it to include evenings, I think up till 10 p.m., as well as weekend service. And also we want to see the Handy Dart kind of assisted transportation services also included within the transit agreement. The band also has a couple of kind of commercial developments. One is a grocery store that should be online later this year, and we want to be able to provide bus service to some of these developments. Next slide. So this is kind of getting towards the active transportation side. So once we completed the road network plan with the province, we wanted to also include bike network or pedestrian multi-use path network programming. And so we continued kind of piggybacked on that road network plan and completed a bike network plan that follows a lot of the same roads, but is looking at bringing separated pathways as much as possible, or shared roadways, but in with safe facilities. And so this is a map that was an output from that bike network plan that the band completed. And something that having a bike network plan allows is it allows the band to pursue kind of external funding for these types of infrastructure. And again, this plan had a lot of involvement with the Provincial Ministry of Transportation. We also received support letters from the city of Tk'emlúps. That was a condition of this getting funding for us to be able to prepare this plan, was that we had linkages to other local communities. And so the city of Tk'emlúps was very supportive of seeing this plan, because it links up with the city's own bike network programming, and creates safer transportation routes within the region. Next slide, please. So within that plan, I believe, again, there's roughly 24 or so individual kind of roads or streets or basically projects. And so we highlighted 2 projects that we wanted to kind of get going on first. And so one of them was the Salish Road project, which was basically kind of a shared kind of a roadway project on a local community road. And the other is an expansion or an extension of a multi-use path on East Shuswap Road, which is actually within a provincial road right-of-way. It's part of the province's highway system, but it's very close to some densified kind of populated areas on reserve. And so next slide, please. So we actually completed I think I've got these. Oh no, they're in the right order. But we completed the Salish Road path. There's a picture of it you can see on your screen right now, last summer. And that was about a kilometer section of road. It was kind of a pretty narrow kind of rural type road, but it was seeing increasing traffic. And whenever there was detours in the city or city construction work, we would see kind of commuters try to go through this portion of our community. And so this was really trying to create some safety and separation for other non-vehicle road users. And so you can see it was, it's an attractive project. And so far I think it's been well received, but it was kind of a demonstration project, or just to see if our version of our bike plan was something that was going to work out well. And so I think we had some learnings and positive experiences of what we'd want to do more of, or how would we want to do a project like this next time. And then we've also got a project planned for this year, which was that other East Shuswap project. And it's similarly, it's another roughly a kilometer section of road. And that one actually has, it's not quite as flat and straight. It's kind of on a hillside. And there's a little bit more cutting and filling and dealing with, other utilities and just, highway standards there. And so as we're moving from planning into implementation, we're learning about how to do these projects well, and we obviously would like to do more of them. Next slide, please. And so this was just kind of a complement to I think the transportation planning, is that Tk'emlúps also completed a community energy plan about a year ago. And that was just, looking at climate change, mitigation and adaptation. And it's an extensive plan that looks at, all systems and all kind of operations of the community. And transportation was obviously a part to all of that. And so some of our other presenters today were talking about how, transportation is obviously one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions and therefore climate change. And so a lot of our, what I've just described in terms of our transportation plans, our transit plans, and active transportation kind of are pointed to or flow out of this this type of an additional plan that the band has. And some of the other kind of goals or targets include things like shifting to electric vehicles. And fortunately last year, Tk'emlúps was able to bring some electric charging stations on reserve, kind of being on a major provincial highway. I think the Tesla group actually approached our community, and we had, I think, about 8 or 10 Tesla stations installed at our Petrocan gas station. And so that was kind of I guess an agreement or some type of an economic development opportunity. And we'd like to expand our opportunities for electric charging to include the band's own fleet vehicles. So we're looking into seeing about providing installations within our kind of administration area, as well as in our public works operation area. But that just kind of complements, I think, the conversation. We definitely started our road network and our bike network planning before we started our climate planning or energy planning. I think the next slide, I think, is the last slide, but I'm happy to answer questions either within this presentation or towards the end of the call. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing a little bit of what Tk'emlúps is doing. I didn't even know how extensive your transportation plan was. It was really interesting to hear about, so thank you for taking the time to share that with us. I don't see any questions in the chat from my side or any hands raised, so we can save all of the questions to the end, or if anybody has any now, we do have a few minutes. Okay. See, you answered everybody's questions. That's how good your presentation was. Oh, there we go. Debbie, if you'd like to unmute yourself and come on camera if you feel comfortable, let us know.
Hi, I just wanted to, my question is with transit. I mean, I come from the Fraser Valley. I don't use transit, but our transit system has been on strike for over 3 months. And if that happened in Tk'emlúps or any other city within the Coast Salish territories, how would that affect the plans that he has made? And with electric vehicles, the cost is substantial. I mean, First Nations people can't buy a regular vehicle, never mind an electric vehicle, because the cost is so high. Like I'm having problems with this plan. It just seems outrageous that First Nations people don't have a lot of money as it is, and then to try to get them into electric vehicles, their hydro bill is going to go sky high. What happens if something happens to the vehicle and the repairs? What are the costs of repairs going to be to fix an electric vehicle? Those are just my questions.
Yeah, this is John. I don't know if I don't see that my video is on, but I'm definitely here. So the first question about the transit arrangement. So it's like basically a municipal type service agreement. So we're kind of at the we're in the same situation that the city is in. So if there was a strike, I imagine it would apply the same way on reserve as it does to the city. Fortunately, we haven't had that situation. We're not. I think we're part of BC Transit, and I imagine in Metro Vancouver, there's TransLink, which is another level of, I guess, regional government. But if there was to be a work stoppage, we would probably just not have transit. I know that the band has its own transit vehicles that can assist membership, in certain situations. But we are basically part of, I guess, the city's transit system. And on electric vehicles, yeah, I agree. It's very expensive. I think we looked into installing our own charging stations before, there was any subsidies or opportunities, and it was almost cost prohibitive. It wouldn't have paid for itself. but this Tesla opportunity came along where they were the ones fronting the cost. And so, obviously, the economics made sense. But we're being told, or that's the understanding, is we're not going to be able to buy a gasoline powered vehicle, 10 years from now, or whenever, some of these federal ambitions are realized. And so we wanted to have the experience of having electric vehicle charging stations and maybe greening our fleet vehicles over time so that we are, purchasing hybrid or full EV vehicles. I think having public works and local operating vehicles be electric, it makes a lot of sense just because they don't travel very much and they return to the same place every day. But the costs of these vehicles is, I'd say, prohibited for the average person, and maybe arguably something that, the economics need to make sense, from a business standpoint as well. But our climate plan or our energy plan looks at things like that, where I imagine very shortly we're going to be relooking at our building bylaws and our development approval bylaws to not only encourage, but maybe require electric vehicle charging installations in new home builds, just so that, our community is ready for that transition. Hopefully some of those kind of answers were helpful.
If there's time, I'd be happy. It's Rebecca from Emily here to address the electric vehicle questions a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question, Debbie, and for your answer, and very well thought out, John. Thanks for showing us some of the intersectional ways that Tk'emlúps is looking to build that future planning into your current planning. Yes, I think, Rebecca, we can take your question, and then we're just going to move to the next presentation.
Okay, just really quickly on the electric vehicle questions. Thanks so much for the question and comment pertaining to how cost prohibitive they are, particularly for Indigenous people. I think that's something that the province can take back. We do have a suite of programs, the Go Electric programs that, for example, offer rebates for individuals and organizations to purchase zero emission vehicles. There's rebates available for home and community charging. And for example, through our Go Electric public charger program, the province does offer much higher rebate levels for Indigenous communities. So I can take it back to the team, the comment on vehicle rebates as well, and whether there should be, enhanced support for Indigenous people and communities for vehicles too. It's a great comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about some of the programs that can help defray costs. Rebecca, I really appreciate that. We're going to move on as there's no other questions. I hope that addressed your questions, Debbie, and we move on to our next presentation, which is the First Nations Low Carbon Transportation Project. Deep dive here with my colleague, Sarah Fraze. I'll give her a brief introduction. So before she joined us here at the BCAFN, she completed her Master's in Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC. If you had the pleasure of working with her, you're in for a treat. She is an absolute superstar. So I will turn that over to Sarah. Are you going to screen share, or is Christy screen sharing on your behalf?
I'll just bring up my presentation in a moment. So thanks very much, Sarah, for the warm introduction. Really good to be here with everyone today. So I'll just share my screen. Great. So before I get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the territory that I'm calling in from, which is the territory of the Secwe Nation on Vancouver Island. I come to this work as a senior policy analyst with the BCAFN as a settler of mixed European ancestry. So I'm really honored to be able to support this great work. And I would also like to, before I get into things, just acknowledge the support of the province of BC for this work. It's really important to have those types of partnerships. So the BC Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation. It's really great to have their support and presence here for this kickoff meeting today as well. And I also just want to acknowledge Kyle for his opening words at the beginning of our session to help start us off and just give some context to this project and the transportation dynamics that we're hoping to work to address. So to dive into a little bit about the mandate that BCAFN has received for this work, we received a mandate through Resolution 12/2023, which is titled Supporting First Nations to Access Safe, Affordable, Reliable, and Low Carbon Transportation to advance First Nations access to transportation in BC. So this mandate directs BCAFN to undertake several areas of activities. One is to assess gaps and opportunities that restrict and assist First Nations in BC to access equitable, safe, reliable, and affordable low carbon and active transportation, as well as transportation services within and between communities. Also work with First Nations to provide recommendations, advocacy for legislation, policy, and program reform to advance these goals. Thirdly, develop a transportation planning guide as a resource to assist First Nations in developing their own self-determined low carbon transportation plans, and strengthening community capacity and awareness. So to address this multi-pronged mandate, BCAFN is undertaking our First Nations low carbon transportation project that incorporates all of these elements. And so really the purpose of this project is to promote and accelerate First Nations access to transportation in these different ways, and to do this in alignment with self-determination and help reduce carbon pollution and uphold the well-being of First Nations people as outlined in the UN Declaration. And so we're really intending to take a holistic approach to this project. So moving along, I think we've heard some really great observations around the identified challenges and priorities when it comes to transportation. So I won't spend too much time on this, but I just think I want to acknowledge that there is, certainly some identified need here. And we've been just recognizing, I think, in recent years that robust and holistic transportation is really key to resilience in the face of pandemics like COVID-19 and climate-related events. And that the negative impacts that result from lack of access to transportation really do impact First Nations' ability to access and fulfill and exercise their inherent human and Indigenous rights, or it can have this impact. So there's really a need for targeted strategies that respond to First Nations' own self-determined priorities and needs, because it's going to be different for each and every community. So what we're hoping to do through this work, I'll just outline each of the elements in a little bit more detail. So one of the key elements of this project that BCAFN is working on is pilot projects. So we'll be working to hopefully strengthen community capacity and climate awareness in 5 First Nations communities through the development of funded low carbon transportation plans and a gap analysis through this pilot process, which I'll speak to a little bit more further in my presentation. The second component of this is to develop a comprehensive guide for First Nations communities in BC to plan and engage in actions to improve community members' access to transportation. So we're calling this the Low Carbon Transportation Planning Guide. So we're hoping to support, a number of First Nations to engage in their own planning activities, and then also create this guide as a template and resource for more First Nations to continue this type of work as they're interested. So that's the first 2 elements that I wanted to go over. The third and fourth element, one is the transportation assessment report. So through research and engagement with First Nations, BCAFN is hoping to assess the gaps and opportunities that restrict and assist these First Nations mobility and access to transportation and transportation services within and between their communities. And we'll be looking to provide recommendations for legislation, policy, and program reform to advance the identified goals and priorities. So the information that we gather through a number of different means, including dialogue circles, research, interviews, as well as a survey and the pilot projects that I mentioned, will be developed into this transportation assessment report, which we'll be planning to bring to First Nations chiefs for consideration and endorsement, potential endorsement. So if we do receive support to advance those recommendations, the next step would be to work with First Nations and other governments on hopefully implementing the recommendations that come out of this work. So that would be the next step, advocacy and engagement. So just to give you a bit of a sense of the timeline for all of this work, here's a timeline that shows how we intend to move forward with these different elements. We started the initial desktop research this spring with the support of Charlotte, who's joining us as a UBC Sustainability Scholar, working with BCAFN this summer. And today we're in the red circle there, which is the kickoff and info session. So we're really pleased to be able to sharing this project with you, where we've come from so far and where we intend to go as our next steps. So later this summer, we'll be working on initiating the pilot projects. So that's our immediate next step. And this will be followed by work on the low carbon transportation planning guide that I mentioned later this year, and the transportation assessment report, which will be finalized in 2025 based on the research and engagement activities that I mentioned. So this is going to take some time, and we're hoping to have that finalized in 2025 and then bring this forward to the chiefs in order to move to implementation following this. So I want to talk a little bit about the pilot projects some more, in case you're listening to this presentation and are thinking that your community might be interested in becoming a pilot community and participating in this project in this way. So I'll share a few details about what this could look like and a bit about the process as well. So BCAFN will be accepting expressions of interest for 5 First Nations to participate in these pilots. Each selected First Nations community will be able to lead the creation of its own self-determined low carbon transportation plan, aimed at responding to the specific needs, realities, and priorities within your respective community. And selected First Nations will receive up to $65,000 in flexible funding to support the creation of this plan, as well as the gap analysis report. We'll be selecting 5 communities that are representative of the diversity of culture, history, and geography in BC. So we want to make sure that there's a really fulsome representation of the different experiences and situations that First Nations find themselves in when it comes to transportation. So we'll be looking to include a coastal community, so a community that's located on or near the Pacific coast. Could be in the north, the mid-coast, or the south areas. And this community might have, for example, their main access to public services via ferry or private boats or air connection. We'll also be looking at including a remote northern community, either in the northwest or the northeast. For example, these communities might have historic or current issues with safety, resource extraction, poor connectivity, or harsh winter conditions. We'll also be looking to include a remote interior community. So that could be a community located in the Caribbean or Kootenay boundary or Thompson, Okanagan regions. And then finally looking to include a suburban or urban First Nations community. So one that's kind of located adjacent to or just outside a larger population center a smaller population center, or that is located within a larger population center. So at a high level, those are some of the categories that we want to ensure we include in the pilot projects. In terms of the deliverables, you've kind of heard me mentioning these, but just to reiterate from the pilots, we'd be hoping for each First Nations community to create their own low carbon transportation plan, as well as a gap analysis report that could be a part of this work. This plan could include targets and actions to secure safe and inclusive transportation, improve transportation efficiency, promote clean mobility options, such as low carbon fuels, electricity, and or hydrogen, as well as improve climate awareness among community members and explore opportunities for economic development through transportation related initiatives. So we've heard about some really good work that Tk'emlúps has been up to in this regard. And so I think that's just some great inspiration for what the pilot communities might look to kind of consider in their own plans. But in order to support the development of these plans, each First Nation will also be able to draw from the draft low carbon transportation planning guide that we're also putting together as part of this project. BCAFN will be working with a consultant to prepare this draft guide, and will be looking to collaborate and receive iterative feedback from the First Nations pilots on this planning guide as well, so we can really get that into good shape for when it's finally released to all First Nations in BC. So this draft guide will be provided to each selected community, and BCAFN staff will be on hand to be able to support as well. So those are some of the supports that are available, as well as the flexible funding of up to $65,000 that I mentioned. So just moving on to the next slide here. In terms of some of the estimated timelines, we're hoping to receive expressions of interest from interested First Nations this summer, and then get into onboarding and working with those pilot communities to develop their work plan and budget, and hiring of any staff that they might need into early fall. In October to December, we'll be working to review the low carbon transportation planning guide, and working with the contractor on that. And so that guide would also be provided to the pilot First Nations to be able to support their work. In October to February, we would be hoping for the First Nations to be able to start conducting research and engagement to inform their plans. And then with the target of having those first draft of those plans ready for May 2024, and then the final versions ready for July 2024. So that's kind of a high level overview of the timelines that we'd be aiming for with these pilot projects. A few more details in terms of the eligibility. First Nations must be First Nation governing body in BC. We'd be looking also to have, for this project, to have the formal support from Chief and Council. So whatever way that makes most sense for communities to provide that. We would be looking to ensure that the communities who participating can meet the deliverables and can make the timelines that I've gone over today work with their schedule. And then we'd be looking for First Nations to be willing to sign a funding agreement with BCAFN so that we can formalize the flow of funding and how we'll be working together on that. A few additional criteria that will be considered. We'll be looking at how the First Nations proposals for the pilot aligns with the relevance of this whole project that I've kind of gone over. So touching maybe on some of the aspects and considerations that we've talked about when it comes to transportation, looking at the level of historic and ongoing challenges related to transportation that that community is experiencing or has experienced. We'll also be looking for a certain level of organizational support for implementing the pilot and capacity, but we're also acknowledging that, you know, hopefully through some of the funding that's provided through this project, that can also help support capacity. And then also just looking for an indication of willingness to work with BCAFN staff where it makes sense for the implementation, for the development of the plans, and to make sure that we can integrate feedback into the low carbon transportation planning guide. So just before I wrap up, I just wanted to say that BCAFN will be sending out the call for expressions of interest out to all First Nations next week following this event. So that will be sent out via our email membership list to First Nations chiefs and leaders, as well as to the registrants of this session. And so please keep an eye out for that. It will include many of the same details that I've walked through today, as well as a bit more detail around some of the specifics, as well as a template for the proposal that we'd be looking for if you're interested. So you can certainly be in touch with any of our staff if you have questions. We'll put our contact info in the chat before we wrap up today's session, but you can also see the contact information for my colleagues Patricia and Christy on the slide here. So thanks very much for listening to myself provide an overview of this work and the opportunities that we're hoping to work with First Nations on over the next number of months. And I'll turn it back to Sarah B. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much to Sarah Fries for your excellent summary of our project. We are going to open up the floor to questions. I'm just going to go through and there's just a couple of historical questions in the chat. We'll get to those first, but if you would like to add your questions, you can either drop them in the chat or put up your hand now and we'll be next. We have about 12 to 15 minutes before we run out of time. So just quickly, our first question. Oh, and before I start, sorry, I just really also wanted to acknowledge Luke from Emily, who has been doing an excellent job of monitoring the chat and connecting our participants with information from the province. So thank you, Luke. Okay. So there's a question from Bryn Armstrong from Kitasoo. I'm going to say this wrong. Sasis, a climate action coordinator for, I believe, Rebecca from Emily. Does the plan address air transport emissions? It's an interesting one. Thank you.
If the question is referring to aircraft emissions, like emissions from airplanes, yes. Clean Transportation Action Plan will address emissions from all modes of transport. That includes off-road mobile equipment. I should note that ultimately we're trying to meet targets based on our BC emissions inventory. So with respect to aircraft and marine vessels as well, the way the inventory is counted is it's for domestic aviation and domestic marine vessels. So like international aircraft and international flights aren't part of the inventory, but flights within the province definitely are.
Hey, thank you so much for answering that question and letting us know the ways that it's tracked provincially. I don't see any other questions in the chat or any hands up. Does anybody want to take this opportunity to ask questions from any of our previous presenters?
Hand up.
There you go. Thanks, Leona.
I just wanted to share with the people on the call that my community, the Health Nation of Bella Bella, has been doing a renewable diesel pilot project that started in March. It's a really, when I heard about renewable diesel, I knew that we couldn't electrify our transportation because we're both, land and marine transportation in my community, that we couldn't electrify overnight. And when I heard about renewable diesel, that it was drop-in ready, it's much like petroleum, and it's made from waste. So it's like a zero waste circular economy opportunity. And we have 6 fishermen using this renewable diesel, and we have 1 heavy duty diesel truck, 2, one's a Zoom Boom, and 1 tourism charter company. And it's really exciting, and I think it would be very supportive to support anybody who else is living on the coast And my dream is go big or go home. Once we complete the pilot project, our people have, through our community engagement, want to switch 100% from petroleum to renewable diesel. So after our pilot and we collate all the information, the research, the data, we're going to bring that final report back to our joint leadership, which is our elected tribal council and our hereditary chiefs, to see if that they support it. And so my dream is, you know, that we're going to be able to tell anybody that's operating in our territory, on the water, or in any vicinity of our territory, that if they're going to operate with diesel, they have to use renewable diesel. And we're going to be able to carry that, you know, in our fuel farm. So I just wanted to share that because it's really exciting. Renewable diesel burns way, way cleaner than conventional. It's there's very little black smoke or particulates that are harmful to our environment. And even the sulfate oxides and nitrate oxides are also very low in terms of burning renewable diesel. So it's really exciting. Be happy to share more if anybody's interested.
Thank you so much for that commentary, Eliana. We really appreciate understanding the options that are out there today. I actually don't know too much about renewable diesel myself, so I found that really informational and I appreciate it. Thank you. I don't know if anybody else has commentary or questions. Okay, I don't see any further questions.
Sorry, Sarah.
Oh,
I
sorry,
just want like one final comment, because I believe part of the project or the pilot is to inform or create policy around transportation. I would love for us to, you know, as part of this pilot, to ensure that the pilot participants are engaging with the people on how important it is for them to not just the nation, but also the tribal councils and anybody operating dirty diesel, that we should be looking to creating policy that we're either electrifying or we're using some sort of cleaner fuels. Because I see a lot of nations that are still buying regular gas and diesel vehicles, and we should create that policy if we really want to create a sense of urgency and meet these targets by 2030. We should really have that inform that policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I understand it's the ongoing issue for a lot of First Nations. Capacity funding is something that I think most people struggle with, getting in the federal and provincial dollars we need to execute projects, and internal capacity in terms of manpower. But yeah, I think we're all excited to see us move towards a more sustainable world, as we're seeing just climate change effects that I hadn't expected to see within my lifetime, like the wildfires and the flooding that we've seen recently in British Columbia. And thank you so much again, Leona, for sharing your opinions with us and sharing a little bit more about what your community is doing to transition to cleaner fuel. I'm gonna just thank everybody briefly that's taken their time to be with us here today. John Torba from Tk'emlúps, Sarah Frays from BCAFN, my colleagues Patricia, Sophia, and Christy, sorry, for taking all your time to be here today and putting in all of this hard work to be able to share with our participants today. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to pass this over to one of our driving forces for the transportation project, Patricia Rojas, who's our climate change coordinator, who'll give you a few closing remarks.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Happy to be here, happy to see you here. And thanks for taking the time to participate in this session on transportation. We will be posting the recording for you and also for all the communities or people who are interested in knowing more about this project and they couldn't attend the session today. We know that climate change is bringing us the most important challenge of our life worldwide. And getting prepared for climate change is also the big challenge, because first, we don't know how hard climate change will put us in the future, but also because it demands to address many other issues that are connected to climate change. And for First Nations, it's also addressing the legacy of colonization that we know. And that's a topic that we discuss many times with the BC government, and particularly with the Ministry of Energy and Mining and Low Carbon Innovation. And I think that was the way how we started this project, because when we were discussing about this Clean Transportation Action Plan and how they are doing the work, we addressed or we raised the concerns that we heard from the nations, that we not just need clean transportation, which is so important, and we talk about this today, but we also need to address the other issues that are limiting First Nations to access to transportation itself, or good transportation. That's how we started the conversations, and that's the way how this project was born. I hope you will be interested in applying or submitting an expression of interest for the project. We really hope that those 5 pilot projects not only will develop their own transportation plans, but also can contribute to 2 main things. One is inform the transportation assessment report, or the gap assessment report, that we will provide provide recommendations, and we will gather all that information and doing more research and doing more interviews as well, and engagement, and we will prepare this report with recommendations to the provincial government. And I hope we will find solutions, and we will be able to implement some of those solutions, which is also very important. And the other part is the transportation planning guide, and we hope we can also support other nations that want to start their transportation work. So we really hope that you will be able to submit an expression of interest, and please also share this information with others who will be interested. And if you have any questions, our team is here always to respond to questions, but also to support in any way that it's possible. So thank you very much again for being here, and we will send you all this information in a following happy mail. Thanks.